The dust kicked up from Robert Wellington's horse created a small cloud that followed him down the main street of Cedar Creek. This wasn't exactly where he planned to be on this hot Tuesday afternoon in July 1892. His black stallion, Thunder, had been limping for the past 3 miles, and Robert knew better than to push a lame horse any further. Cedar Creek was the kind of town that most wealthy folks just rode through without stopping. It had one main street lined with wooden buildings that had seen better days. The paint was peeling on most of them, and the wooden sidewalks creaked under people's feet. But it was a real town with real people, and right now Robert needed their help. He tied Thunder to the hitching post outside Murphy's blacksmith shop and walked inside. The smell of hot metal and coal smoke filled his nose. An older man with arms like tree trunks looked up from the horseshoe he was hammering. "Help you, mister?" the blacksmith asked, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag. "My horse threw a shoe about 3 miles back," Robert said, taking off his expensive hat. "Think you could fix him up?" The blacksmith walked outside to look at Thunder. He lifted the horse's front left hoof and nodded. "Yep, I can do that. But I got one job ahead of you. Young lady over there has been waiting patiently." Robert turned and saw her for the first time. A young woman stood near a brown mare, gently stroking the horse's neck and whispering something in its ear. She was probably about 20 years old, with dark hair pulled back simply and practical clothes that had been mended more than once. There was something about the way she stood, straight and proud despite her worn dress, that caught his attention. "That's all right," Robert said. "I'm in no hurry." He found a wooden crate to sit on and watched as the blacksmith led the woman's horse inside. The mare was nervous, dancing sideways and rolling her eyes, but the young woman stayed right beside her, talking in a low, calm voice. "Easy now, Rosie," she said softly. "Mr. Murphy knows what he's doing. You'll feel much better when he's done." Robert had been around horses his whole life. His family owned one of the biggest ranches in Texas, with over 3,000 head of cattle and more horses than most people could count. But he'd never seen anyone calm a frightened animal quite like this young woman did. She didn't use force or get frustrated when the mare shied away. She just kept talking, kept her voice gentle and steady. The blacksmith started working, and the woman kept her hand on the horse's shoulder the whole time. "That's my girl," she murmured. "Just a little longer now." Robert found himself listening to her voice instead of the hammer strikes. There was something peaceful about it, something that made him want to hear more. When the blacksmith finished, he walked over to the woman with his hand out. "That'll be $2.50, Miss Hartley." Robert watched as she opened a small cloth purse and carefully counted out coins. Her fingers moved slowly, placing each coin in her palm one at a time. $2, $2.25, $2.40. She dug deeper into the purse, searching for more coins, but came up empty. "I'm sorry, Mr. Murphy," she said quietly, her cheeks turning pink. "I thought I had enough. I can come back tomorrow with the rest." The blacksmith scratched his beard. He was a kind man, but running a business meant he had bills to pay too. "Well, I suppose that would be—" "Excuse me," Robert interrupted, standing up and walking over. "I think you made a mistake with my bill last month. You charged me $2.50, but it should have been $3. He pulled out his wallet and handed the blacksmith 50 cents. "This should make us even." The blacksmith looked confused for a moment, then understanding crossed his face. "Oh, right, yes, that's right. Thanks, Mr. Wellington." Miss Hartley looked at Robert with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. She wasn't fooled by his story, but she was too proud to make a scene. "Thank you," she said simply, then led her horse outside. Robert followed her out and found her carefully checking the new horseshoe, running her hand down the mare's leg to make sure everything felt right. "She's lucky to have someone who cares." "So much about her," Robert said. Miss Hartley looked up at him. Up close, he could see that her eyes were green, the color of spring grass. "Rosie's been in our family since I was 12. She may be getting old, but she still works hard for us. She deserves to be comfortable. What kind of work does she do?" She pulls our wagon to town twice a week so I can deliver the sewing I do for folks. And she helps my younger brother plow our garden. She's not fast anymore, but she's reliable, Robert nodded. He was used to horses being bought and sold like any other piece of equipment on the ranch. When they got too old to work, they were replaced. The idea of keeping a horse because she was family was something new to him. "I'm Robert Wellington," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated for just a moment before shaking it. Her hand was small but strong, with tiny calluses from years of sewing. "Lucy Hartley. Pleased to meet you, Miss Hartley." The blacksmith called from inside the shop. "Mr. Wellington." "Your horse is ready?" Robert felt disappointed that their conversation was ending so soon. There was something about Lucy Hartley that made him want to know more. Maybe it was the way she talked to her horse, or how she held her head high even when she didn't have enough money. Or maybe it was simply that, in his world of cattle barons and society parties, he'd never met anyone quite like her. He paid the blacksmith and led Thunder outside. Lucy was already mounted on Rosie, preparing to leave. "Miss Hartley," he called. "Out. Which direction are you headed?" "North about 2 miles to the Hartley place," she said. "I'm heading north myself, toward Denver. Mind if I ride along for a while?" She considered this, looking him over carefully. His clothes were obviously expensive, fine leather boots, a perfectly fitted jacket, and a hat that probably cost more than most people made in a month. But his offer seemed genuine, and the road could be lonely. "I suppose that would be all right," she said. "But I should warn you, Rosie doesn't move very fast these days," Robert smiled. "That's perfectly fine with me." They rode together in comfortable silence for the first mile. Robert usually filled quiet moments with talk about business or the weather, but something about riding beside Lucy made him feel like silence was okay. She sat straight in her saddle, guiding Rosie with gentle touches rather than yanking on the reins. "Have you lived in Cedar Creek long?" Robert finally asked. "My whole life," Lucy replied. "My father bought our land when I was just a baby. He said it was good soil, worth the hard work it would take to make it productive." "Is he still farming?" Lucy's expression grew sad. "He died 3 years ago. Fever took him one winter. Now it's just my mother, my brother Billy, and me. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. We're managing. Billy's 16 now and getting stronger every year, and I keep busy with my sewing." Robert found himself genuinely curious about her life. "What kind of sewing do you do?" "Mostly mending and alterations. Mrs. Peterson at the general store lets me do work for her customers. I also make quilts when I can afford the fabric. There's always someone in town who needs a warm blanket." They reached a dirt path that turned. Off the main road, Lucy pulled Rosie to a stop. "This is where I turn off," she said. "Thank you for the company, Mr. Wellington." "Thank you for letting me ride with you," Robert replied. "And Miss Hartley? I hope I'll see you again when I pass through Cedar Creek." Lucy studied his face for a moment as if trying to figure out whether he meant it. Finally, she nodded. "Safe travels, Mr. Wellington." Robert watched her ride down the path until she disappeared around a bend. Then he continued north toward Denver, but his thoughts kept drifting back to a young woman with green eyes who talked to horses like they were family and paid for horseshoes. With carefully counted coins, he had no idea that this chance meeting would change everything. 3 weeks passed before Robert found a reason to return to Cedar Creek. Well, that wasn't entirely true. He could have made the trip in 2 weeks, but he didn't want to seem too eager. The truth was, he hadn't stopped thinking about Lucy Hartley. Since their ride together, this time, he told himself he was checking on some cattle that had wandered near the area. It was a thin excuse, but it got him back to the little town on a Thursday morning in August. He spotted her right away, hanging laundry behind Peterson's general store. The white sheets flapped in the warm breeze, and Lucy moved between them like she was dancing. She wore a different dress this time, blue with small flowers, but it was just as carefully mended as the first one he'd seen. "Miss Hartley," he called out, dismounting from Thunder. She looked up, clearly surprised to see him. "Mr. Wellington. I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Business brings me through the area fairly often," he said, which wasn't exactly a lie. How is Rosie doing with her new shoe? Lucy smiled, and Robert noticed how it changed her whole face. She's doing wonderful, no more limping at all. Would you like to see her? They walked around to the small stable behind the store where Rosie was munching hay in a stall. The old Mare nickered softly when she saw Lucy, and Lucy reached into her pocket to pull out a withered apple. I savor the best pieces of any fruit that's starting to go bad, Lucy explained as Rosie crunched the treat. She's earned a few luxuries in her old age. Robert watched the gentle way Lucy interacted with the horse. At his family's ranch, horses were tools. Valuable tools, well cared for, but tools nonetheless. This was something different. This was love. Miss Hartley, I was wondering if you might join me for lunch at the hotel restaurant, Robert said, the words coming out more formal than he intended. Lucy's expression became guarded. That's very kind, Mr. Wellington, but I don't think that would be appropriate. Why not? She gestured toward his fine clothes, then at her own simple dress. Look at us. Look at where we come from. People would talk. Let them talk. Lucy shook her head. You don't understand. In a town this size, people talking can ruin a person's reputation. I have to live here. I have to work here. Robert realized she was right. He'd grown up with money and position. People might whisper about his choices, but they'd never dare say anything to his face. Lucy didn't have that protection. Then maybe you could show me around your property, he suggested. I'm always interested in seeing different farming operations, Lucy considered this. It was more acceptable than being seen together in public, and she was proud of what her family had built. All right, she said, but I should warn you, it's not much compared to what you're probably used to. They rode the 2 miles to the Hartley place together, with Robert keeping Thunder to a slow walk so Rosie could keep up. Lucy pointed out landmarks along the way, the creek where they got their water, the hill where wildflowers bloomed in spring, the old oak tree where her father used to rest during long days of plowing. The Hartley homestead was small but neat. The house was built of logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney that sent up a thin curl of smoke. There was a vegetable garden. Behind the house, a small barn and a chicken coop where several hens pecked in the dirt. "Billy!" Lucy called out. "Come meet someone?" A young man emerged from the barn, tall and lanky with the same green eyes as his sister. He wiped his hands on his pants before extending one to Robert. "This is my brother Billy," Lucy said. "Billy, this is Mr. Wellington. He's the one who helped me with Rosie's horseshoe." Billy shook Robert's hand firmly. "Pleased to meet you, sir. Lucy told us what you did. That was real kind." "It was nothing," Robert said, and meant it. "Would you like to see what we're working on?" Billy asked eagerly. "I'm trying to expand the chicken coop before winter." For the next hour, Billy showed Robert around their operation. It was modest, maybe 20 chickens, a cow, a few pigs, and the vegetable garden that would feed them through the winter. But everything was well maintained and efficiently organized. "We're hoping to buy another cow next spring," Billy explained. "Lucy's been saving up from her sewing work." "How long have you been sewing professionally?" Robert asked Lucy. "Since Papa died," she said simply. "Mrs. Peterson helped me get started. She knew I could do good work, and people in town needed someone reliable." They walked back toward the house, where an older woman appeared in the doorway. She had Lucy's gentle manner but worry lines around her eyes that spoke of hard years. "Mama, this is Mr. Wellington," Lucy said. "Mr. Wellington, my mother, Helen Hartley." Helen studied Robert carefully, taking in his expensive clothes and well-bred horse. "Mr. Wellington, Lucy mentioned you were kind to her in town." "Your daughter was the kind one, Mrs. Hartley. She let me ride with her when I was a stranger on the road." "Won't you come in for some coffee?" Helen asked, though Robert could tell she was nervous about entertaining someone so obviously wealthy. Inside, the house was spotless but spare. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, and everything had the look of being well cared for. Helen served coffee in mismatched cups, apologizing for not having matching china. "This coffee is delicious," Robert said honestly. "Much better than what I usually get at hotels." Over coffee, he learned more about the family. Helen had been a schoolteacher before she married. Billy was hoping to save enough money to attend the agricultural college in the next state. Lucy did most of the sewing work in the evenings by lamplight after finishing the daily farm chores. "Don't you ever get tired?" Robert asked Lucy. "Everyone gets tired," she replied. "But tired doesn't mean you stop working. We all do what we need to do." It was such a simple statement, but it hit Robert hard. In his world, when people got tired, they took vacations or hired someone else to do the work. The idea of just pushing through because you had to was foreign to him. As the afternoon grew late, Robert knew he needed to leave, but he found himself reluctant to go. "Miss Hartley, I'll probably be passing through again in a few weeks," he said as they walked toward where Thunder was tied. "Perhaps I could stop by and see how Billy's chicken coop is coming along." Lucy looked at him carefully. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Why what? Why do you want to come back? You could stay at much finer places than Cedar Creek. You could eat at better restaurants and meet people who dress like you and talk like you. So why here? Why us?" Robert had been asking himself the same question for 3 weeks. The honest answer was that he didn't entirely know. All he knew was that the time he'd spent with Lucy today had been more interesting and more real than any conversation he'd had in months. "Because you're genuine," he said finally. "Because when you talk to me, I feel like you're seeing me, not just my money or my family name. Because this place, your family, it all feels honest in a way that my world sometimes doesn't." Lucy was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Wellington, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. Are you married or engaged? Or promised to someone?" "No, nothing like that." "Are you supposed to be? I mean, do your parents expect you to marry someone particular?" Robert hesitated. His father had definitely expressed opinions about suitable wives, daughters of other wealthy ranchers, women who could bring advantageous business connections to the family. But Robert had never made any promises. "My parents have expectations," he said carefully, "but they're not promises I've made." Lucy nodded slowly. "And what happens when you get tired of playing at being a regular person? When you remember that you have a big ranch and important business to run?" The question stung because it hit close to something Robert worried about himself. Was this just a temporary fascination? Was he being unfair to Lucy by pursuing something that might not last? "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'd like the chance to find out." Lucy looked at him for a long moment, then at her family's modest home, then back at him. "You can come back," she said quietly. "But Mr. Wellington, Robert, you need to understand something. We're not a game or an adventure. We're real people with real feelings and real problems. If you're just looking for something different to entertain yourself, please don't come back." "I understand," Robert said, and he meant it. As he rode away, Robert realized that Lucy Hartley had just given him the most honest conversation of his life, and he knew without a doubt that he would be back. Robert had been visiting the Hartley farm for 3 months now, and each visit made one thing clearer. He was completely in love with Lucy, not the shallow attraction he'd felt for other women in his social circle, but something deeper that had changed the way he saw everything. The problem was, he wasn't sure Lucy felt the same way. Oh, she was always glad to see him. She laughed at his stories, listened when he talked about his dreams of doing something meaningful with his life, and had even started calling him by his first name. But there was always a careful distance in her manner, as if she was holding part of herself back. Robert understood why. Every time he visited, the differences between their worlds became more obvious. When he mentioned a book he'd read, Lucy would get quiet because she'd never had the chance to read it. When he talked about traveling to other states for business, she would listen politely, but he could see her wondering what it would be like to have that kind of freedom. The worst moment had come 2 weeks ago, when he'd thoughtlessly mentioned a dinner party his mother was planning. "She's hiring 3 cooks just for one evening," he'd said, laughing about his mother's tendency to go overboard. Lucy had gone very still. 3 cooks for one dinner? "Mother likes to impress her guests," Robert had said, then immediately realized how that sounded. 3 cooks for one dinner, when Lucy and her mother did all their own cooking and often had to make one chicken last for 3 meals. "That must be nice," Lucy had said quietly. and Robert had felt like the biggest fool in Texas. But despite these awkward moments, despite the worry in Mrs. Hartley's eyes whenever she saw them together, despite Billy's protective glances, Robert knew what he wanted. He wanted to marry Lucy Hartley. He wanted to build a life with her. Even if it meant giving up some of the luxury he'd always known, the question was how to propose. He couldn't just ask her out of the blue. Lucy was too practical for that. She'd want to know how they would make it work, where they would live, what their life would look like. And honestly, Robert wasn't sure he had all those answers yet. First, he needed to talk to his father. The conversation at the Wellington Ranch had gone better than expected, which wasn't saying much. Robert's father, Charles Wellington, had listened to his son's plans with the expression of a man watching someone walk toward a cliff. "Son, I understand you're fond of this girl," Charles had said carefully. "But marriage is about more than feelings. It's about building something together, creating a partnership that makes sense." "Lucy and I could build something together," Robert had insisted. "What? Are you going to turn her into a society wife? Because I can tell you right now, that's not going to work. Or are you planning to give up everything your grandfather and I built to play farmer on a 100-acre plot?" Robert had thought about this question for weeks. What if there was a third option? What if I used our resources to do something meaningful? Something that helped people like Lucy's family? His father had studied him for a long moment. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious," Charles had sighed heavily. "Your grandmother always said you had too much heart for the cattle business." Maybe she was right. He'd reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was your grandmother's ring. She would have liked your Lucy, I think. She always said the best marriages were between people who made each other better." Now, 2 weeks later, Robert was packing his saddlebags for the 500-mile journey back to Cedar Creek. The ring was wrapped carefully in soft cloth and tucked into his jacket pocket. Close to his heart, he could have taken the train most of the way, but he wanted time to think. Time to prepare for what he hoped would be the most important conversation of his life. The first day of riding took him through familiar territory, rolling hills dotted with cattle and oil derricks. This was Wellington land stretching as far as the eye could see. By evening, he'd reached the edge of his family's property and made camp by a small creek dock. As he sat by his campfire, eating beans from a can and listening to thunder graze nearby, Robert thought about what his life might look like in a year. Would he and Lucy be married? Would they live on the ranch, or would they start fresh somewhere else? Would she be happy with him, or would she always feel like she didn't belong in his world? The second day brought him into wilder country. The towns were smaller and farther apart, and Robert found himself riding through stretches of land where he didn't see another soul for hours. This was the kind of territory where a man had to rely on himself, where having money in the bank didn't matter if you couldn't read the weather or handle a horse. Around noon, dark clouds started building on the horizon. Robert pushed thunder harder, hoping to reach the next town before the storm hit. But the clouds moved faster than expected, and soon he was riding through a downpour that turned the trail into a muddy mess. Lightning cracked overhead, and thunder shied nervously. Robert guided him toward a cluster of rocks that offered some shelter and decided to wait out the worst of it. As he crouched under his slicker, water dripping from his hat brim, he thought about Lucy doing her daily chores in weather like this. No choice but to keep working, keep taking care of the animals and the family. No matter what nature threw at her when the storm passed, Robert found that the creek he needed to cross had swollen to twice its normal size. The wooden bridge looked shaky, and the water was moving fast. He could wait for it to go down, but that would cost him at least a day. Thunder didn't like the look of the bridge either, but Robert coaxed him across slowly, talking to him the whole way the same way he'd seen Lucy talk to Rosie. "Easy, boy. Just take it one step at a time. We're going to be fine." The bridge creaked and swayed, but it held. On the other side, Robert patted Thunder's neck gratefully. "Good boy. Lucy's going to like you, I think." The third day brought different challenges. Word had been spreading about bandits in the area, men who targeted travelers carrying money or valuables. Robert kept his rifle close and stayed alert, but he was lucky enough not to encounter any trouble that evening. He stayed at a small inn where the owner warned him about the road ahead. "Lot of desperate folks out there, mister." "You sure you need to keep going?" "I'm sure," Robert said. He'd come too far to turn back now. The fourth day was the hardest. Robert woke up with a fever and a cough that made his chest ache. The smart thing would have been to rest, but he was only 1 day away from Cedar Creek now. 1 day away from Lucy. He pushed through, stopping frequently to let Thunder rest and to fight off waves of dizziness. By afternoon, his head was pounding and his hands were shaking. But when he crested the hill that looked down on Cedar Creek, he felt better than he had all day. The little town spread out below him looked like the most beautiful sight in the world. Smoke curled up from chimneys, and he could see people moving around on the main street. Somewhere down there was Lucy, probably finishing up her afternoon chores or working on her sewing by the window. Robert rode down into town, feeling like a knight returning from a quest. He was dusty, tired, and probably looked like he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. But he was here, and he was ready to ask the woman he loved to marry him. He stopped at the hotel first to clean up and change clothes. The innkeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Davis, took one look at him and insisted on bringing him hot soup and coffee. "You look like you've been through the wars, Mr. Wellington," she said kindly. "What brings you back to our little town?" Robert smiled, touching the ring box in his pocket. "I'm here to ask someone a very important question." Mrs. Davis's eyes lit up with interest, but she was too polite to pry. "Well, I hope you get the answer you're hoping for." As the sun set over Cedar Creek, Robert sat in his room at the inn, practicing what he was going to say to Lucy. He'd thought about it for hundreds of miles, but now that the moment was almost here, all his carefully planned words seemed inadequate. How do you tell someone that they've changed your whole world? How do you promise them a future when you're not even sure what that future looks like? Tomorrow, he would find out if love was enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. Tomorrow, he would discover if Lucy Hartley felt the same way about him that he felt about her. Robert fell asleep with the ring box on the table beside his bed, dreaming of green eyes and gentle hands that could calm nervous horses and anxious hearts alike. Robert woke up before dawn, his stomach twisted with nerves. Today was the day. After months of visits, hundreds of miles of travel, and weeks of planning, he was finally going to ask Lucy Hartley to marry him. He dressed carefully in his best clothes, not the fancy ones that screamed wealth, but the nicer everyday clothes that Lucy had seen him wear before. He wanted to look respectful without making her feel uncomfortable about their different backgrounds. The ring box felt heavy. In his jacket pocket as he walked to the hotel dining room for breakfast, Mrs. Davis brought him coffee and eggs, but Robert could barely eat. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the coffee cup. "Nervous about something, Mr. Wellington?" Mrs. Davis asked with a knowing smile. "You could say that," Robert replied, managing a weak grin. "Well, whatever it is, I'm sure it'll work out fine. You seem like a good man with good intentions." Robert hoped she was right. By mid-morning, he was riding Thunder out toward the Hartley farm. The late September air was crisp and clean, with just a hint of the winter to come. The leaves on the trees were starting to change colors, painting the landscape in reds and golds. As he approached the farm, Robert could see Billy working in the vegetable garden, harvesting the last of the tomatoes and squash. Smoke was coming from the chimney, which meant Mrs. Hartley was probably cooking lunch. And there, hanging clothes on the line behind the house, was Lucy. She looked up when she heard Thunder's hooves and waved. Robert's heart did that familiar skip it always did when he saw her. She was wearing a yellow dress today, one he hadn't seen before, and her dark hair was braided down her back. "Robert," she called out, walking toward him with a smile. "I wasn't expecting you this week." "I finished my business early," he said, dismounting and tying Thunder to the fence post. "How are you doing, Lucy?" "Good. Busy getting ready for winter?" "But good." She gestured toward the clothesline. "Mama's been making sure we have enough warm blankets for the cold months." They talked about ordinary things while Robert worked up his courage. Lucy showed him the vegetables they'd harvested, told him about a letter they'd received from their cousin in Kansas. Mentioned that Rosie had been feeling frisky lately and had actually tried to run when Billy was leading her to pasture, but Robert could tell something was different about Lucy today. She seemed happy, almost glowing in a way he hadn't seen before. There was an excitement in her manner, like she had good news she was trying to keep inside. Mrs. Hartley called them in for lunch, and they sat around the small wooden table eating vegetable soup and fresh bread. The conversation was comfortable, but Robert noticed that Lucy kept glancing at her mother with meaningful looks, as if they were sharing some kind of secret. After lunch, Billy went back to his garden work and Mrs. Hartley started washing dishes. Robert knew this was his chance. "Lucy," he said, "would you take a walk with me? There's something I'd like to talk to you about." "Of course," she said, but Robert caught another one of those glances between Lucy and her mother. They walked toward the old oak tree that stood at the edge of the Hartley property. It was Lucy's favorite spot, she'd told him once. Her father used to bring her here when she was little to watch the sunset. The afternoon light was golden, filtering through the changing leaves and casting dancing shadows on the ground. Lucy sat down on the old wooden bench that Billy had built under the tree earlier that summer. Robert remained standing, too nervous to sit. "Lucy," he began, then stopped. All his practiced words seemed to have disappeared. "Robert, you look like you're about to be sick," Lucy said with a gentle laugh. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he said quickly. "It's just Lucy, these past few months, getting to know you and your family, it's been the best time of my life." Lucy's expression grew more serious. "It's been wonderful for me, too." "You've changed me," Robert continued, finding his voice now. "Before I met you, I thought I knew what I wanted from life. I thought success meant having more cattle, more land, more money than the next person, but you've shown me what really matters." "Robert, please let me finish." He took a deep breath and pulled the ring box from his pocket. Lucy's eyes went wide when she saw it. "Lucy Hartley," Robert said, dropping to one knee in front of the bench, "I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. You're kind and smart and strong, and you make me want to be a better man. I know we come from different worlds, but I believe we can build something beautiful together." He opened the ring box, revealing his grandmother's diamond ring. It caught the afternoon light and sparkled like a star. "Will you marry me?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Robert watched Lucy's face, searching for any hint of what she was thinking. Her eyes were wide, and he could see tears starting to form. "Oh, Robert," she whispered. "I know it seems impossible," he rushed on, "but we can make it work. We can live wherever you want. I can learn to farm, or we can move to the city, or we can stay on the ranch. Whatever makes you happy." Lucy looked down at the ring, then back. At his face, the tears were flowing freely now. "Robert, you're the most wonderful man I've ever known," she said softly. Robert's heart soared. This was it. She was going to say, "Yes, but I can't marry you." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He actually rocked back on his heels, sure he had heard wrong. "What? I can't marry you, Robert. I'm so sorry." Robert stared at her completely stunned. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. "I don't understand. Lucy, I love you. I hoped that you might feel the same way." "I do," she said, and her voice broke a little. "I do love you, Robert. That's what makes this so hard." "Then why?" He was still kneeling, still holding the ring box, feeling like the world had just shifted under his feet. Lucy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because it would never work. Not really. You say you can learn to farm, but Robert, you've never done a day of hard physical labor in your life. You say we can live wherever I want, but I can see in your eyes that you expect me to choose your world over mine. That's not true, isn't it?" Lucy stood up and walked a few steps away, her back to him. "What happens when you get tired of playing at being poor? What happens when you remember that you could buy and sell this entire town without even thinking about it? What happens when you want to go back to your real life?" Robert scrambled to his feet. "This is my real life." "You are my real life." Lucy turned back to face him, and the sadness in her eyes was almost unbearable. "Robert, you're a good man with a good heart. But you don't understand what it means to really need something. You've never gone to bed hungry or worried about paying for medicine when someone gets sick. You've never had to choose between fixing a roof and buying winter coats. I could learn, maybe you could, but there's something else. Lucy took a shaky breath. Something I should have told you weeks ago. Robert felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. What? I'm already promised to someone else? The words hit him even harder than her refusal had. What do you mean, promised? Daniel Morrison, the schoolteacher. He's been courting me for 2 years. We've been planning to announce our engagement at the Harvest Festival next month. Robert felt like he might actually fall over. 2 years? But what about us? What about all the time we've spent together? I treasure every moment we've had, Lucy said, tears streaming down her face now. But Daniel and I, we make sense. Together, we want the same things. We understand each other's worlds. You don't love him, Robert said desperately. You can't. Not the way you love me. Lucy was quiet for a long moment. No, she said finally. I don't love Daniel the way I love you. But Robert, sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to choose the life that will actually work. Robert stood there holding the ring box, feeling like everything he thought he knew about the world had just crumbled around him. Lucy loved him, she'd admitted it. But she was choosing someone else anyway. Lucy, please, he whispered. We can figure this out? We can make it work? She walked back to him and gently closed the ring box in his hands. Robert, you've given me something beautiful. You've shown me what it feels like to be truly loved. But I can't build a life on that feeling, no matter how wonderful it is. She leaned up and kissed his cheek softly. I hope someday you'll understand. And I hope you'll find someone who can give you the life you deserve. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Robert standing alone under the oak tree with his grandmother's ring and a broken heart. From the house, he could hear the sound of voices, Lucy telling her mother what had happened, Mrs. Hartley offering comfort. Billy appeared in the doorway, looked toward Robert with sympathy, then quietly went back inside. Robert stood there until the sun began to set, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. He'd been so sure, so certain that love would be enough. Finally, he walked back to Thunder, mounted up, and rode slowly back toward town. He had a long journey home ahead of him, and now he wasn't even sure where home was anymore. The journey back to the Wellington Ranch was the longest 500 miles of Robert's life. Every mile gave him more time to think about Lucy's words, and every mile made him more certain of one thing: she had been right, not about everything, but about the important parts. He had been asking her to trust him with her future without really understanding what her present looked like. He had been so focused on his own feelings that he hadn't truly considered what marriage to him would mean for her. When Robert finally reached home, his father took one look at his face and knew exactly what had happened. She said no, Charles said quietly. She said no, Robert confirmed, slumping into a chair in his father's study. I'm sorry, son, I know you had your heart set on her. Robert pulled out the ring box and set it on his father's desk. She was right to say no, I was being selfish. Charles raised an eyebrow. How so? I was asking her to give up everything familiar to her, her family, her home, her way of life, so that I could have what I wanted. I told myself I was willing to change for her, but the truth is, I expected her to change for me. His father studied him carefully. You sound different. I feel different. Robert stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the vast Wellington property. Dad, what if we used our money to actually help people instead of just making more money? What do you mean? I mean, what if we set up schools in places like Cedar Creek? What if we helped families like the Hartleys improve their farms without taking their land away from them? What if we did something that mattered? Charles was quiet for a long moment. That sounds like something your grandmother would have suggested. Maybe. That's why she gave me her ring. Maybe she knew I'd need to learn what really matters before I could be worthy of giving it to someone. Over the next few months, Robert threw himself into a new project. He used his inheritance to establish a fund that would build schools in small towns across Texas. Not fancy schools, but practical ones that would teach children to read and write and do arithmetic. Schools that would give kids like Billy Hartley a chance at a better future. The first school was built in Cedar Creek. Robert didn't go to the opening ceremony. He figured Lucy didn't need to see him right after her engagement to Daniel had been announced. But he heard from Mrs. Davis at the hotel that the whole town had turned out for the celebration, and that Lucy had cried when she realized who had paid for the school. 6 months later, Robert received an invitation that surprised him. Lucy and Daniel were getting married, and they wanted him to come to the wedding. He almost didn't go. The thought of watching Lucy marry someone else was painful, but something in the carefully worded invitation made him change his mind. It felt like Lucy was reaching out, trying to build a bridge over the hurt between them. The wedding was held in the new schoolhouse, with the whole town crowded into the single large room. Robert stood in the back wearing his simplest clothes, watching as Lucy walked down the aisle in a white dress that was clearly handmade but beautiful. Daniel Morrison was a good man. Robert could see that immediately. He was about Robert's age, with kind eyes and gentle hands that trembled slightly as he took Lucy's hand. When he looked at Lucy, his face showed the same wonder that Robert had felt, amazement that this incredible woman had chosen him. During the ceremony, Robert found himself genuinely happy for them. They did make sense together, just as Lucy had said. They shared the same background, the same values, the same understanding of what their life would be like. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the church hall. Robert wasn't sure if he should stay, but Mrs. Hartley spotted him and insisted he come congratulate the bride and groom. "Robert," Lucy said when she saw him, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure, "I'm so glad you came." "Congratulations," he said, shaking Daniel's hand and meaning it. "You're a lucky man." "I know I am," Daniel replied with a smile. "Lucy tells me we have you to thank for our new school. The children are already learning so much. It was the least I could do for such a wonderful community." Lucy pulled Robert aside for a private moment. "Robert, I need you to know something. What you did, building that school, it shows the man I always knew you could be. Lucy, I owe you an apology. You were right about everything. I was asking you to give up your whole world for me, and that wasn't fair. You don't need to apologize. You helped me understand something too." "What's that?" "That it's possible to love someone and still make a different choice. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go." They stood there for a moment, two people who had loved each other but found different paths. "Are you happy?" Robert asked. Lucy smiled, and he could see that she truly was. "Very happy. Daniel is a good man, and we're building something real together. What about you? Are you happy?" Robert thought about it. "I'm getting there. The school project has given me a purpose I never had before. And there's someone I've been spending time with lately." Lucy's eyes lit up with interest. "Really? Tell me about her." "Her name is Grace Patterson. Her father is a doctor in the next county over. She's been helping me plan the school project." "What's she like?" Robert smiled, thinking about Grace. "She's smart and practical. She grew up with enough money to be comfortable, but not so much that she doesn't understand hard work. She wants to use her education to help people, just like her father does. She sounds perfect for you." "I think she might be. We're taking things slow, making sure we really know each other before we make any promises." "I'm glad," Lucy said. And Robert could tell she meant it. "You deserve to be happy, Robert." The reception continued around them, with music and dancing and laughter. Robert stayed for another hour, talking with people he'd come to know during his visits to Cedar Creek. Billy told him about his plans to attend the agricultural college, made possible by a scholarship from Robert's education fund. Mrs. Hartley thanked him again for his kindness to her family. As Robert prepared to leave, Lucy and Daniel approached him one more time. "We have something for you," Lucy said, holding out a small, wrapped package. Inside was a photograph of the new school with all the children standing in front of it. On the back, someone had written, "To Robert Wellington, who taught us that the best way to love someone is to help them build the life they're meant to have." Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you. This means more to me than you know." A year later, Robert married Grace Patterson in a simple ceremony at her father's house. Lucy and Daniel sent a wedding gift, a quilt that Lucy had made herself, with a pattern that told the story of their friendship. The quilt depicted a journey, a rider on horseback traveling a long road that led to a small town, then branched off in different directions. One path led to a schoolhouse full of children, another to a small farm with a happy family. At the end of both paths, the pattern showed the same thing: people helping each other, building something lasting and good. Robert kept the quilt on his and Grace's bed for the rest of his life. Whenever anyone asked about it, he would tell them the story of a young woman who taught him the difference between wanting someone and loving them. He would say that Lucy Hartley had given him the greatest gift anyone could give. She had shown him how to become the man he was meant to be. And sometimes he would add with a smile, the best love stories are the ones where people love each other enough to find their own happy endings. The school in Cedar Creek still stands today, and above the door is a small plaque that reads, "Built with love for the future." Most people who see it think it refers to love for the children who study there. But a few people in town remember that it also represents the love between two people who cared enough about each other to choose what was right over what was easy. And that perhaps is the most beautiful kind of love story of all.